Something is absent from the historical record, not a minor omission, not a trivial oversight, something colossal. The sort of thing that, once recognized, becomes impossible to ignore, and you start questioning why it was never presented to you from the start. Before 1850, across every continent, there existed machinery and constructions that contradicted everything we've been told about pre-industrial limitations. They weren't crude, they weren't coincidental, they were intricate, intentional, and in many cases, still present today. Repurposed, relabeled, emptied of their original purpose, absorbed into a harmless narrative that creates more puzzles than it solves. The cultures that built them operated on concepts modern engineers are only now starting to revisit. And then, within a handful of devastating decades, those cultures and their expertise vanished. This isn't a discussion about pseudoscience. Every object on this list is verified, every structure has been photographed. Each mechanism either resides in a collection, beneath the soil, or inside the very walls of a building you might pass daily without ever realizing its former identity. The issue isn't whether these things existed. The issue is why you were never taught about them, and whose interests benefited from ensuring you never questioned it. What unfolded before 1850 is a narrative that was forcibly rewritten. The society that created these machines was extensive, linked, and technologically sophisticated in ways that clash with the accepted chronology. That society had a designation, some call it Tartaria, and regardless of whether you accept that label, what remains undeniable are the machines themselves. 10 of them, each functioning without fire, without petrol, without any of the power sources that standard history claims were the sole options before industrialization. Each in its own manner, later wiped out, suppressed, or quietly dismissed into oblivion. These are those 10 machines. Before we continue, if this is the kind of past they avoid in classrooms, you already understand what to do. Subscribe, hit the alert bell. This channel explores the past that got buried, the innovations that got erased, and the puzzles that remain unanswered. You won't want to miss what's ahead. Now let's rewind. Machine 1, the Tartarian frequency spires. Examine any old photograph of a 19th century city, not a contemporary skyline, but the authentic one, the world prior to the reset. What stands out? Needles, pinnacles, ornate upright forms rising from roofs, from churches, from administrative buildings, from depots and infirmaries and schools. Dozens of them, sometimes hundreds within a single city block. Today we call them ornamental. We're told they were erected for beauty, for spiritual meaning, for municipal pride. But that reasoning has a flaw. Ornamentation costs money, vast amounts of it. Many of these structures appeared in cities that were, by all measurable standards, barely affording basic sewage and street maintenance. So why pour enormous resources into useless spires? They weren't useless. They had a purpose, just not one the textbooks acknowledge. The Tartarian culture, the advanced worldwide society that, according to erased evidence, preceded the 19th century collapse, worked with resonant energy principles. The spires were collectors. They harvested energy from the planet's natural electromagnetic field, from the interface between the upper atmosphere and the ground, from the harmonic frequencies moving through the Earth in measurable, repetitive patterns. Nikola Tesla understood this fully. That's exactly what he was resurrecting with Wardenclyffe Tower. In 1901, he wasn't creating something novel. He was recalling something ancient. The geometry of these spires follows strict rules. The ratios, the material selections, copper tips, iron frameworks, particular stone types, are uniform across buildings on different continents, built by societies supposedly unaware of each other. Gothic churches in France, Buddhist shrines in Southeast Asia, the domes of Russian Orthodox cathedrals, the towers of Central Asian mosques, identical ratios, identical substances, identical narrowing upward forms ending in a metal tip. A structural examination of several pre-1800 150 towers in Central Europe found copper within spire frames that served no load-bearing purpose. Copper doesn't reinforce stone, but copper conducts electricity superbly, and these spires were almost universally erected above intersections of subterranean water veins, locations where natural telluric electromagnetic activity remains observably higher even today. They weren't reaching for heaven. They were pulling energy from ground and air together. And when the culture that understood how to operate them was eliminated, the spires became monuments to a technology nobody was allowed to recall. Machine 2, the Parthian cell. In 1938, a German archaeologist named Wilhelm Koenig was organizing basement storage at the Iraq Museum in Baghdad when he came across a clay pot roughly the size of a clenched fist. Inside was a copper tube. Inside the copper tube was an iron rod. The whole unit was capped with bitumen. Koenig recognized it instantly, a galvanic cell, a battery. The vessel dated to roughly 250 BCE. It wasn't a one-off. Later digs across the Tigris, Euphrates region uncovered many similar assemblies across a broad territory and a span of hundreds of years. When modern copies were made using identical materials and filled with an acidic fluid, grape juice, vinegar, citrus acid, they generated between 1.5 and 2 volts of electricity, consistently, predictably, for extended periods. The standard explanation, when provided, is electroplating, covering base metals with silver or gold using electric current. And there's circumstantial proof. Gold-coated artifacts from the same era display coatings so thin and even that modern electrochemists agree they couldn't have been made by fire, gilding alone. Someone was running steady current through a liquid bath and transferring metal atom by atom. Someone understood polarity. Someone grasped the process well enough to control it, duplicate it, and expand it. That's not a fluke discovery. That's a system of knowledge. And if that system existed in the ancient Near East more than 2,000 years before the official story of electricity begins, the question isn't just how it originated. It's where it disappeared to. The Parthian cell generated electricity without burning. No flame, no steam, no processed fuel. A clay container, 2 metals, and an acidic liquid available to any grape grower. And for reasons archaeology has never convincingly clarified, this technology didn't evolve. It didn't disseminate, it appeared, it worked for centuries, then it vanished entirely, leaving only pots in a museum basement for a 20th century scholar to stumble upon almost by chance. Machine 3, Heron's rotating sphere. In the 1st century AD, in the grand city of Alexandria, a mathematician and inventor named Heron described a device that should have been impossible for another 700 years. He named it the eolipile, the steam bowl. It was a sealed brass sphere mounted on hollow pivot shafts connected to a lower vessel of boiling water. As steam traveled up the shafts into the sphere, it exited through 2 bent nozzles on opposite sides. The escaping steam produced rotation. The sphere spun continuously, powered entirely by thermal energy converted into rotary motion. That is a steam engine, not a crude forerunner, a working steam engine, the same fundamental principle as the machines that drove the industrial age. Built and recorded in ancient Alexandria, 18 centuries before James Watt submitted his first patent. Heron didn't hide his discovery. He published it. He detailed the eolipile alongside many other mechanical and pneumatic inventions in a work called Pneumatica *, which endured through the medieval era and into the Renaissance. European engineers had access to Heron's writings, and yet nothing, no steam-based progress for 700 years. A functional principle, written down and available, simply never pursued. The question is why. One theory is that ancient slave economies lacked financial motivation to swap human labor for machines. But Heron himself described self-operating theater puppets, coin-operated dispensers, and programmable carts. He was plainly fascinated by automation, as were his sponsors. Economic inertia alone doesn't account for 17 centuries of silence on a technology already invented and shown to work. The Tartarian perspective offers a different interpretation. The Aeolipile wasn't a curiosity left unexplored. It was a surviving remnant of a far older engineering tradition, one already running steam-driven and pneumatic systems on a large scale, whose broader knowledge was systematically erased. What we call Heron's invention may have been Heron's rediscovery, and what appears as a developmental gap may have been a deliberate deletion of evidence. Machine 4, the Byzantine computer. In 1900, Greek sponge divers near the island of Antikythera discovered the wreck of an ancient Roman-era ship. Among the recovered items was a corroded bronze mass that nobody could identify. It sat in an Athens museum for decades, slowly cracking apart before researchers finally realized what they were examining. What they were examining was a mechanical calculator, a hand-wound bronze assembly containing at least 37 finely cut gears arranged into complex differential systems, epicyclic trains, and pin and slot linkages, technologies that mainstream history claims weren't reinvented until the 13th and 14th centuries. The device tracked the sun and moon, forecasted eclipses using the Saros and Metonic cycles, marked the 4-year Olympic calendar, and modeled the moon's elliptical path with enough accuracy to account for its changing speed, a mathematical insight Copernicus wouldn't formalize until 1543. The Antikythera mechanism was constructed around 100 BC. It consumed no fuel. It needed no energy source beyond a human wrist turning a crank. It calculated precisely, repeatedly, reliably astronomical data that would have taken a trained mathematician hours to derive manually. And it wasn't a trial version. The craftsmanship, the sophistication of the gear ratios, the elegance of the mechanical answers to genuinely complex mathematical challenges, all of it points to a device born from a mature engineering lineage, not a lone inventor trying something new. That lineage left no other direct remnants, no earlier prototypes, no workshop notes, no rival designs. The Antikythera mechanism emerges in the historical record fully realized, solitary, and inexplicable under the assumptions of the standard timeline. A 2000-year-old computer with no ancestors and, more revealingly, no descendants. The skill to build it existed once. Then it was simply erased. Machine 5, the Hathor glow carvings. At the Temple of Dendera in Egypt, engraved into stone walls more than 2000 years old, are images that Egyptologists label ritual depictions of lotuses and snakes. Examine them through an alternate lens, which several electrical engineers have, and you perceive something entirely different. The carvings show what resembles a large glass envelope, elongated and narrowing, with a snake-like filament inside. A cord or channel connects the base of each envelope to a shape consistent with a Crookes tube, an evacuated glass chamber through which high-voltage current can flow to create visible glowing discharge. A column at the base has been identified by analysts as resembling a high-voltage standoff insulator of the type used in early electrical experiments. In the 1980s, Austrian electrical engineer Walter Garn constructed a physical replica of the Dendera carving using the exact proportions from the stone image. When hooked to an induction coil producing high-frequency current, it lit up. The snake-shaped electrode inside the evacuated glass emitted visible plasma discharge, matching what's shown in the relief. The replica worked. This doesn't prove ancient Egyptians possessed electric lighting in the contemporary sense. What it does prove is that the geometry carved in that temple matches a functional electrical discharge device, and that the match is not random. The relief isn't the sole clue. Chemical testing of paint residue inside certain sealed Egyptian tombs has found zero soot on ceilings. No trace of lamp black in spaces that would have required sustained illumination to paint the extremely detailed murals covering their surfaces. Something was lighting those rooms, something that didn't burn. In the Tartarian view, Egypt wasn't a primitive society relying only on torches and flame. It was an extension of a worldwide advanced civilization possessing access to technologies including electric light. The Dendera carvings in this interpretation aren't religious symbolism. They are engineering drawings etched in stone precisely because stone endures, saved for whoever came later with the vision to understand them. Machine 6, the vacuum railway. In 1847, the South Devon Railway in England began running a segment of track with no locomotive, no steam engine pulling cars, and no draft animals. The cars moved anyway, and they moved faster than any steam train of that era. The system worked on air pressure. A cast-iron pipe, 15 inches in diameter, ran between the rails for the route's full length. Inside was a piston linked to the lead car by a connector passing through a long slit, sealed with a greased leather flap. At stations, powerful stationary suction engines placed on the ground evacuated air from the pipe ahead of the piston. Atmospheric pressure behind the piston pushed the car forward. The cars ran silently, cleanly, and at speeds over 60 miles per hour on steep inclines, outperforming any contemporary steam locomotive. The engineer was Isambard Kingdom Brunel, but he wasn't the pioneer. George Medhurst had patented a working pneumatic transport concept in 1812, 35 years before Brunel's version. The Dublin and Kingstown Railway's pneumatic extension opened a year before South Devon. And in Paris, the Saint Germain atmospheric system was already moving passengers through underground tunnels using identical principles. The vacuum railway needed no onboard fuel, no engine weight, no fire risk in tunnels, no cinder burns on passengers, no coal smoke fouling the air. It was silent, fast, and clean, and it functioned. The standard explanation for its disappearance is rodents. Leather flap valves allegedly chewed apart along the South Devon line, causing air leaks that made the system impractical. But this account has been challenged by railway historians for decades, and the simultaneous shutdown of multiple atmospheric projects across several countries within a single decade suggests something more intentional than a rodent problem. Someone decided the world would run on coal. The vacuum railway was inconvenient to that decision. Machine 7, the Roman hot floor system. Walk into the ruins of a Roman bath complex anywhere from Britain to the Middle East and study the flooring. You will find a forest of small brick columns, *pili*, standing about 2 feet tall, supporting a raised stone slab over an empty crawl space. Behind one wall is a furnace opening. This is the hypocaust, the Roman radiant, floor heating system operational across the empire for several centuries, representing an engineering accomplishment most of medieval Europe wouldn't replicate for 1,000 years after Rome fell. The furnace heated air. The heated air moved naturally through the crawl space via convection, warming the stone floor evenly across its whole surface. Hollow clay tiles, *tubuli*, built into the walls allowed warm air to rise through the wall structure, providing radiant heat from multiple surfaces at once. The result was a room maintaining stable thermal comfort without direct flame exposure, without smoke filling interior spaces, and with dramatically higher energy efficiency than any open hearth. But the hypocaust becomes especially interesting where no furnace connection has been identified. There are Roman-era buildings in North Africa and the Eastern Mediterranean where the underfloor heating architecture is intact and unmistakable, yet the heat source is architecturally inconsistent, with a wood-burning furnace or missing entirely. At several such sites, geothermal placement has been documented. The structures sit directly above natural hot springs, with the hypocaust serving to distribute freely occurring ground heat rather than burned fuel. The Romans knew what lay beneath them. They chose those sites deliberately. They engineered a distribution system for a free, pre-existing heat source and integrated it into buildings that looked to any outside observer like fuel, dependent heating. That knowledge how to locate, access, and circulate geothermal energy through constructed environments does not appear in any surviving Roman technical manual. It's observed in the archaeological layer, and then it ends, Machine 8, the celestial chariots. The Vedic scriptures of ancient India contain detailed technical accounts of flying machines called vimanas. This isn't poetic license. The *Vaimanika Shastra *, the Ramayana *, the Mahabharata *, the Samaranga Sutradhara *, several independent ancient Sanskrit texts composed across different centuries describe vimanas with a precision and internal logic that far exceeds allegory. They describe hulls that flew. They describe building materials. They describe the operating principles powering those craft. The Samaranga Sutradhara * devotes an entire chapter to Vimana construction, describing strong, durable bodies made from lightweight substances, mechanisms hidden within the structure, and a power source based on something translated as mercury vortex, quicksilver centrifuge, or rotating liquid metal. A spinning column of mercury brought to operating temperature generated upward thrust. The text describes the sounds these craft made, their behavior at altitude, their maneuverability, and the techniques needed to pilot them safely. In the 1990s, scientists at the Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore examined the *Vaimanika Shastra *'s descriptions and concluded that several of the described craft designs were aerodynamically sound, consistent with vehicles that could produce lift under the right conditions. The mercury vortex engine outlined in the Samaranga Sutradhara * has been studied by aerospace researchers who note that rotating plasma and height, temperature, liquid metal generate electromagnetic fields with directional force properties matching what the ancient text describes. The Tartarian interpretation doesn't place Vimana technology in ancient India in isolation. It links it to a shared worldwide technological heritage. The accounts in Sanskrit scriptures, the carvings in Egyptian temples, the inexplicable towers of 19th-century cities, these are not separate mysteries. They are fragments of the same obliterated record, surfacing in whatever cultural container managed to preserve them in the centuries after the reset. Vimanas didn't run on combustion. They ran on principles the modern scientific establishment has barely begun to formalize. And someone once knew exactly how to construct them. Machine 9, Byzantine fire. In 672 AD, the Byzantine Empire introduced a weapon that its adversaries described with horror and confusion in accounts that survive to this day. They called it liquid fire, sea fire, Roman fire. We call it Greek fire. It was a projected incendiary fluid launched from ships via bronze tubes, thrown in clay pots, poured from ramparts onto attackers below, that burned on water that reignited when quenched. They adhered to surfaces and continued burning until the fuel was fully consumed or physically scraped away. Water did not stop it. Sand or urine were the only partially effective countermeasures. Greek fire ended sieges. It demolished fleets. It was the deciding factor in multiple major Byzantine military victories over 2 centuries. Its existence represented such an overwhelming advantage that the Byzantines classified it at the highest level of state secrecy. The formula was known only to the emperor and the family of Callinicus of Heliopolis, the Syrian engineer credited with its introduction. It passed from emperor to emperor as a state inheritance. Then it was lost. Not gradually, not through obsolescence, completely and suddenly sometime in the 13th century, amid the disruptions of the Crusader period and the collapse of Byzantine central authority. Every proposed formula since naphtha-based, quicklime-based, phosphorus-based has failed to fully replicate the documented properties. The ability to reignite after water contact, the ability to float and burn, the adhesive clinging behavior. Modern chemists working with materials available to a 7th, 7th-century Syrian engineer cannot reproduce these properties simultaneously, which raises the possibility that Callinicus was working from knowledge that predated the 7th century by a significant margin, inherited from a source the official record doesn't recognize. The formula wasn't invented, it was recalled. And when the chain of memory snapped, it was gone entirely because nobody knew anymore where it had truly come from. Machine 10, the resonant stone of Thebes, at the edge of the Theban necropolis on the Nile's west bank, two massive stone figures have faced east for more than 30 years. They are the colossi of Memnon, each carved from a single block of quartzite sandstone, standing over 60 feet tall, weighing approximately 720 tons. For centuries in the ancient world, they were famous not for their scale, but for their voice. Every morning at sunrise, the northern colossus sang. Greek and Roman visitors recorded it in inscriptions carved directly into the statue's legs. More than 90 surviving inscriptions describe the sound as a musical note, a bell-like tone, a voice emerging from the stone at the exact moment that direct sunlight first struck the figure. The sound was heard by emperors, poets, and generals. Strabo, the geographer, heard it and documented it. Pausanias heard it. The Roman Emperor Hadrian camped nearby for 2 full days specifically to hear it, and had his court poet compose an ode to the experience. The modern standard explanation is thermal expansion, cracked stone, damaged in a 27 BC earthquake, absorbing solar heat and expanding with enough force to produce a note from the fracture. This is physically plausible. It also fails to explain why the sound was consistently described as musical, a single pure tone rather than a random structural groan, and why it stopped entirely after the Roman Emperor Septimius Severus ordered the statue restored and the crack repaired around 199 AD. After the repair, the colossus was mute. It has never sung again. The Tartarian interpretation treats the colossi of Memnon as intentional acoustic engineering, a designed resonant device built to respond to the specific electromagnetic and thermal conditions of sunrise over the Nile at that latitude, oriented with precision to capture that exact interaction. The singing wasn't accidental. It was the purpose. Someone built a 720-ton stone instrument tuned to the frequency of the rising sun, placed it exactly where it would perform every morning without any intervention, and embedded the mechanism so deeply in stone that not even a Roman emperor's stonemasons could silence it without destroying it entirely. No fuel, no upkeep, 300 years of daily performance, and then silence, not because the technology failed, but because someone finally repaired it. 10 machines, 10 different societies, 10 different centuries, and one thread running through all of them. The persistent, documented archaeological truth that those who came before us were not rudimentary. They were not fumbling toward the Industrial Revolution like infants learning to walk. They were functioning at a level of technical sophistication that the official timeline of human history simply cannot absorb without breaking apart, because the story handed to you has real gaps in it, gaps shaped exactly like these 10 machines. Devices that ran without fuel, built on principles so far outside the accepted model that the easiest response was to rationalize them away or never discuss them at all. That is not an accident, it is a design. And patterns this consistent, this worldwide, this thoroughly documented across stone and ceramic and metal, do not arise from random chance or isolated brilliance. They arise from a shared inheritance, a body of knowledge that existed before the reset, that surfaces in fragments wherever the suppression was incomplete, wherever the stone was too hard to destroy, or the text too widely copied to burn entirely. The civilization that built resonance spires and vacuum railways and electric temples and singing statues did not fall because it was feeble. Civilizations at that level of technical integration do not fall from within. They are extinguished, and what replaces them is always the same. A simplified story, a compressed timeline, a history with the troubling sections carefully removed. You have just spent 30 minutes with 10 of those sections. The question is what you do with them now. Because the research does not stop here, the machines do not stop at 10. The evidence does not fit back into the box it came out of. If any part of this resonated with something you already suspected about the official narrative, you already recognize the truth sitting beneath it. Subscribe, leave a comment telling us which device stopped you cold, and stay close, because the next video goes somewhere the history books are very certain you should never look.